Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Into part 1. The next morning, Mark woke up in his small, dimly lit apartment. The sound of the rain tapping against the window was the only thing breaking the silence. He had barely slept the night before, his mind racing with thoughts of Eleanor's proposal. Was this really happening? Was he really about to marry a woman he had just met, all in the name of business? The weight of it pressed down on him, but there was no turning back now. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the lawyer's office at noon. We'll begin the paperwork. Eleanor." Mark sighed, rubbing his face. He had agreed to it, but the reality of the situation was starting to hit him. It was one thing to say yes out of desperation. It was another thing to actually take the first steps toward a life-changing decision. At noon, Mark arrived at the law office, his hands slightly trembling as he gripped the steering wheel. The building was sleek and modern, with glass windows reflecting the bustling city streets. It was a far cry from the small town he had grown up in, and he couldn't help but feel out of place. He stepped inside, the sharp scent of leather and polished wood hitting him immediately. The receptionist greeted him with a smile and led him to a conference room where Eleanor was waiting. She was already seated at the large, polished table, her posture straight and confident. She looked up when he entered, her eyes scanning him as if she were appraising a piece of property. "Mark, I'm glad you could make it," she said smoothly, her voice calm and collected. "Please, take a seat." Mark hesitated for a moment before sitting down across from her. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him, but he couldn't show his nerves. This was a business deal, nothing more. There was no room for emotions here. "I know this is all moving fast," Eleanor began, her fingers lightly tapping on the surface of the table. "But we need to act quickly. This is a time-sensitive matter." Mark nodded, trying to mask the uncertainty in his chest. Eleanor slid a stack of documents across the table toward him. "This is the contract. It outlines everything clearly, your responsibilities, my responsibilities, and the terms of our agreement. You'll sign this today, and we can proceed with the next steps." She paused, studying him. "I know it's a lot to take in, but trust me, Mark, this is the best thing for you." He glanced at the documents in front of him, his heart pounding in his chest. The words on the paper blurred for a moment as he read through the terms, each one more formal than the last. "So, you're really offering to pay off my father's debts, secure my future, and all I have to do is marry you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor's eyes softened just slightly, though her expression remained professional. "Yes, it's simple really. In exchange for a contract marriage, you'll have the financial stability you've been struggling to find. And, in turn, I'll have the companion I need to protect my family's legacy." Mark didn't respond immediately. He could feel the weight of the decision on his shoulders. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about his future. Eleanor was offering him a chance to escape the financial ruin that had been looming over him for so long. It was an opportunity he couldn't afford to turn down. "Okay," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'll do it. I'll sign." Eleanor smiled, a small, knowing smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm glad to hear that, Mark. This is just the beginning." Later that afternoon, Mark found himself back in the car, holding the signed contract in his hand. The reality of what he had just agreed to was starting to sink in. As he drove through the city, the streets bustling with people, his mind was consumed with thoughts of what was to come. Would this really work? Would he be able to keep his distance emotionally, as the contract required? Or would he start to develop feelings for Eleanor? She was a powerful, confident woman, but there was something about her that intrigued him. Maybe it was her calm demeanor or the way she seemed to have everything under control. Either way, he knew this was the start of something big, something that could change the course of his life forever. When he arrived back at his apartment, he sat on the couch, still holding the contract in his hands. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Eleanor. "The first official event as husband and wife will be tomorrow night. A gala. I expect you to be there, and we'll make our public debut." Make sure you're dressed appropriately. Mark exhaled slowly, looking at the message. A gala. His first event as the husband of Eleanor Brooks, a woman he barely knew. The thought felt surreal. He had just signed a contract that bound him to her, and now he had to step into a world that was as foreign to him as the wealth and power she held. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew one thing for sure. His life would never be the same again. In a part 2. The next evening, Mark stood in front of his closet, staring at his clothes. He had never felt so out of place in his entire life. The gala was a world away from the small, humble apartment he had been living in just a few days ago. He had no idea what to wear to something like this, but Eleanor had made it clear in her message that he needed to look the part. He pulled out a suit, his best one, which wasn't much, and began to dress. He knew it wasn't the finest attire, but it would have to do. As he buttoned up his shirt, his mind wandered back to the contract he had signed earlier that day. He had agreed to marry Eleanor, to step into a world of wealth and power, but the reality of it was beginning to settle in. He wasn't sure what was more overwhelming, the thought of attending such an event or the fact that his new wife, the woman he barely knew, was about to be introduced to the world as his partner. When Mark arrived at the venue, his heart raced. The hotel was grand, its marble floors gleaming under. The lights and the chandeliers above seemed to sparkle like 1,000 stars. Guests in elegant gowns and sharp tuxedos mingled in the lobby, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Mark felt his nerves heighten as he walked further into the room. He could feel every eye on him, but no one paid him any attention, at least not yet. He had no idea how to act in this world. His hands were cold, and his mind was a blur. It felt like he was a stranger in his own life. As Mark stood at the entrance, Eleanor appeared like a vision from another world. She was stunning in a deep red gown that clung to her figure in all the right ways. Her silver hair was styled flawlessly, and her presence seemed to command the attention of everyone in the room. She walked toward him with a grace that seemed effortless. When she reached him, she smiled. "Mark," she said, her voice smooth. "You made it." The way she said it made him feel like he had just passed a test he didn't know he was taking. "You look great," she continued, appraising him with a glance. "But we need to move quickly. The press is here." Mark nodded, feeling the tension in his chest rise. This was real now. This was the life he had agreed to be a part of. The gala was like nothing Mark had ever experienced. The room was filled with powerful people, business tycoons, socialites, and philanthropists. Eleanor introduced him to several of them, her hand never leaving his as she guided him through the crowd. She was in complete control, while Mark felt like he was just following her lead. He had never been surrounded by so much wealth, and the polished smiles and cold handshakes felt like a different language. He kept quiet, trying to blend in, but Eleanor's confident demeanor made it clear that this was her world, and he was just a part of it, for now. After what felt like hours of mingling and posing for photos, Eleanor finally turned to him. "I know this is overwhelming, Mark," she said softly, her voice just for him amidst the noise of the gala. "But remember, this is what we agreed on. Just stick with me, and you'll be fine." Mark looked at her, feeling a mix of awe and uncertainty. He had never seen someone so powerful, so at ease in a world that seemed so foreign to him. He nodded, trying to reassure himself. He had made this choice, after all. This was the life he had agreed to live, no turning back now. Later in the evening, as the guests were settling into their seats for dinner, Eleanor leaned in close to Mark. "I need you to give a speech," she whispered, her tone casual but serious. Mark's stomach dropped. "What?" he asked, his voice betraying his panic. "You need to introduce me. Make it short, make it simple. Just thank the guests for coming and mention our partnership. They'll expect it. It's part of the deal." Eleanor's eyes met his, steady and sure. She was used to this. This was just another day for her, another step in the plan. But for Mark, it was a leap into the unknown. He couldn't remember the last time he had spoken in front of a crowd this large. His palms were sweaty, and his mind went blank as he stepped up to the microphone. As Mark took the stage, the room fell silent. The spotlight hit him, and he could feel the heat on his face. He cleared his throat and tried to steady his breath. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "Thank you all for being here tonight." His eyes scanned the crowd, trying to focus. "As you know, this evening is not just a celebration of wealth, but a celebration of partnership." Eleanor and I are honored to be here with all of you. He glanced at Eleanor, who was standing by the stage, watching him with a quiet, approving gaze. He continued, his nerves slowly easing. We believe in building a future together, and we hope to work with all of you to create something truly special. He finished with a quick nod and stepped back from the microphone. The crowd erupted into applause, and Mark exhaled, relieved it was over. When he returned to Eleanor's side, she gave him a small smile. Well done, she said, her voice low enough for only him to hear. Mark wasn't sure if he was proud of himself or just relieved it was over. But Eleanor's approval meant something to him, even if he wasn't sure why. He was beginning to see that this partnership, this contract marriage, might not be as simple as he had thought. There was more at play here than just money and power. But for now, all he could do was follow her lead and try to figure out how he fit into this world. Into part 3. The following weeks passed in a blur for Mark. He had settled into his new routine, playing the role of a husband in public, but keeping his distance from Eleanor behind closed doors. Every event they attended felt like another performance, another opportunity to uphold the facade of a perfect partnership. Eleanor was always composed, always in control, while Mark continued to feel like an outsider in her world. But something had started to shift within him. It was subtle at first, a passing glance, a momentary connection, but it grew stronger with each passing day. Eleanor was not just the powerful, calculating woman he had first met. She was also kind, thoughtful, and surprisingly vulnerable in moments when no one else was watching. One evening, after another gala where Mark had once again stood by Eleanor's side, the two of them found themselves alone in a private lounge of their penthouse. The event had ended late, and most of the guests had already left. Mark was sitting on the couch, his tie loosened and his jacket discarded on the armrest. Eleanor was standing by the window, gazing out at the city lights. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Mark could feel the distance between them, but for some reason, tonight felt different. He stood up and walked over to her. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he asked, his voice low, breaking the silence. Eleanor turned to look at him, her eyes softening as she nodded. "Yes, it is. But sometimes I feel like it's all just a facade." Her words caught him off guard. Eleanor had always seemed so composed, so sure of herself. To hear her admit to feeling uncertain was a rare moment of vulnerability. Mark took a step closer, unsure of what to say. "I never thought I'd end up like this," she continued, her gaze drifting back to the view. "I thought I had everything under control. But this marriage, this arrangement, it's not what I expected." Mark felt a strange sense of relief hearing her speak so honestly. For the first time, he saw her as more than just a businesswoman with a cold exterior. She was human, just like him. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I know what you mean," he said. "This whole thing, it's strange, but I never thought it would lead to anything more than just a contract. But sometimes I wonder if it's not just about the money or the status. Maybe it's about finding something real." He wasn't sure where the words were coming from, but they felt right. He had spent so much time hiding behind the arrangement, pretending that this was all just business, but the truth was, he was starting to feel something more for her. Eleanor's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was no mask, no walls between them. "Mark," she said softly, her voice carrying a vulnerability he hadn't heard before. "I never wanted this to be just a transaction, but I didn't know how to let anyone in. I thought I could handle everything on my own, but now I'm not so sure." She took a step closer to him, her expression filled with a mixture of uncertainty and longing. Mark's heart raced as he stepped toward her, feeling the magnetic pull between them. This was the moment he had been avoiding, the moment when everything could change. He reached out and gently took her hand. "You don't have to handle everything alone," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm here, Eleanor, and I want us, to be real." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for sincerity. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, he knew that he couldn't keep pretending. He had to be honest with himself, and with her. For a moment, the world outside the window seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, standing in the quiet of their penthouse, the weight of everything they had been through hanging between them. Then, Eleanor gave a small, tentative smile. "Maybe we can start over," she whispered. "Maybe we can make this something real." Mark's heart swelled at the possibility, but he knew that it wouldn't be easy. There were still so many hurdles to overcome, so many doubts to face. But for the first time, he felt like they were on the same page. They weren't just playing a role anymore. This was the beginning of something new. End of part 4. The following weeks passed, and something between Mark and Eleanor had shifted. They began to spend more time together outside of the public eye, letting their initial agreement fade into the background as they explored what they could become. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was real. They had started to open up to each other, sharing moments of vulnerability and laughter that Mark hadn't expected. Eleanor, the powerful businesswoman who had seemed untouchable at first, had started showing him a side of herself that was more than just the cold, calculating persona she wore at work. He began to see the woman beneath the layers of confidence, someone who had been hurt and had built walls to protect herself. One afternoon, Mark and Eleanor were sitting together in their private study, a room Eleanor had designed to be as quiet and isolated as possible. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the room. Mark had been working on some papers for his law degree, but Eleanor was distracted, her thoughts far away. "What's on your mind?" Mark asked, looking up from his notes. Eleanor didn't immediately respond. She was staring at the city skyline, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her coffee cup. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet, almost wistful. "I never really thought about what I wanted," she said softly. "I always knew what I needed, what I had to do to succeed. But I never stopped to think about what I actually wanted out of life. I've spent so many years building this empire, this life, but at what cost?" Mark looked at her, sensing the weight of her words. He set his papers down and moved closer, wanting to comfort her, but unsure how. He had always seen her as someone who had everything, someone who had it all under control. But now, he was seeing the cracks in her armor. "You've been strong for so long," Mark said, his voice gentle. "Maybe it's time to let someone else take some of the weight. You don't have to do it all alone." Eleanor met his gaze, her eyes filled with an emotion he hadn't seen before. It wasn't just the powerful businesswoman she had been showing him. It was someone who was starting to believe in the possibility of having something more, a partnership that wasn't just a business deal. "I don't know how to trust people anymore," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been let down so many times, Mark. I built this wall around myself because I was afraid of being hurt again." Mark reached out, gently taking her hand in his. He could feel the tremble in her fingers, the vulnerability she was trying to hide. "I'm not going anywhere," he said softly. "You can trust me." Eleanor didn't speak, but she didn't pull away either. For the first time in their relationship, there was a quiet understanding between them. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The next day, Mark and Eleanor attended a charity event together. It was a huge affair, full of wealthy donors and powerful people from the city. But this time, it felt different. For once, Mark wasn't just the husband of the CEO. He was starting to see himself as an equal partner in this world. He wasn't just there to stand by her side for appearances. He was there because he wanted to be. Eleanor had given him the confidence to step into this world, and he was beginning to believe that he belonged. As they made their way through the crowd, Eleanor leaned in to speak to him. "You've been doing well," she said with a small smile. "You fit in better than I thought you would." Mark smiled back, feeling a sense of pride. It wasn't just about fitting in, though. It was about finding his own place in this world. He wasn't the same man who had walked into the penthouse weeks ago. He had changed, and so had his relationship with Eleanor. As the night wore on, they found themselves on the balcony of the event space, looking out over the city. The lights below twinkled like stars, and the sound of music and conversation floated up to where they stood. Eleanor took a deep breath, looking at the view. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. Mark looked at her, sensing the weight of her question. "All the time," he replied, his voice steady. "But I don't know what the future holds. I just know that whatever happens, we'll face it together." Eleanor turned to face him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for something. She didn't say anything at first, but then, slowly, she reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "I'm glad you're here," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark could feel his heart beat faster as he looked into her eyes. This wasn't just about a contract anymore. This was real. They were both letting down their walls, and it felt like the beginning of something they hadn't expected, but something they both needed. For the first time, Mark didn't feel like he was pretending. He wasn't just the man behind the business arrangement. He was a part of something greater, something that was slowly but surely turning into love. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a marriage of convenience after all. End of part 5. The weeks that followed brought a sense of unexpected ease between Mark and Eleanor. What had started as an arrangement to escape their individual struggles had slowly morphed into something more. It wasn't love, at least not yet, but it was something real. They began to spend more time together, sharing meals, going on walks, even talking about their pasts. For Mark, it was a revelation. The woman he had initially seen as a powerful, calculating CEO had layers he never imagined. Eleanor was sharp, yes, but she was also thoughtful, and as he got to know her better, he realized that her cold exterior was just a shield, one she had built over years of disappointment and loneliness. Eleanor, for her part, seemed to let her guard down around him, and it wasn't long before they began to talk about things that had never come up before. Family, dreams, regrets. The connection they had started with a contract was starting to feel like something more. One evening, Mark found himself in the penthouse living room, staring out over the city. He had just finished some work, and Eleanor was nowhere to be found. She had mentioned something about a late meeting, but he hadn't expected her to be gone this long. As he stood there, looking out at the twinkling lights of the city, he realized how much his life had changed in just a few months. The man who had walked into Eleanor's world was no longer the same man. He had become part of something bigger, something he hadn't expected, a partnership, a family. And yet, there were still questions. Where was this going? What would happen when the contract was over? Would they go back to being strangers? Would they even want to? His thoughts were interrupted when the door opened, and Eleanor stepped in, her heels clicking softly against the floor. "You're still awake?" she asked, her voice a little surprised. Mark turned around, a faint smile appearing on his face. "I couldn't sleep. Just thinking." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "About what?" Mark hesitated for a moment. It wasn't like him to be so open about his feelings, but there was something about Eleanor that made it easier. "About us," he said simply. "About where this is all going." Eleanor's expression softened as she walked over to him. "I've been thinking about it too," she said, her voice quieter now. "It's hard, isn't it? Not knowing what comes next." Mark nodded. "Yeah, but I guess that's life. We can't always have everything figured out." There was a moment of silence between them, the weight of their shared understanding filling the space. Finally, Eleanor spoke again. "I never expected any of this, Mark," she said softly. "I didn't expect to feel like this with you. You were supposed to be a temporary fix, someone to help me with the family's legacy and business. But now, I'm not so sure." Mark's heart skipped a beat at her words. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tight. "I mean," Eleanor paused, as if searching for the right words. "I mean, I didn't expect to actually care about you, to want more than just a business arrangement. But here we are." Her voice faltered slightly, and Mark could see the vulnerability in her eyes. He took a step closer to her, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. "Eleanor," his voice was calm, but the emotions behind it were undeniable. "You don't have to be scared of this. Of us. I don't have all the answers either, but I'm here. I want this. I want us to be real." Eleanor's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but there was also something else there. Hope. A quiet, unspoken promise that maybe, just maybe, they could find something true in all of this. For a long moment, they just stood there, neither of them saying a word. It was as if the entire world had stopped for a brief second, leaving just the two of them in their shared silence. And then, as if on cue, Eleanor smiled, just a little. It wasn't the professional, controlled smile she usually wore in public. This was something different, something softer. "Maybe we can figure this out together," she said, her voice a little more certain than before. Mark smiled back, a sense of relief washing over him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, he knew one thing for certain. They had started something real. The next day, Mark and Eleanor found themselves at another charity event. This time, however, there was no pressure. They weren't just there for appearances. They were there as partners, both on the same page, and that made all the difference. As the night went on, they laughed together, shared moments of genuine connection, and for the first time, Mark felt like he wasn't pretending. He was really a part of this world with Eleanor. Maybe it wasn't perfect, and maybe it would never be the fairy tale they both secretly wanted. But it was theirs, and that was enough for now. End of part 6. Mark and Eleanor's relationship continued to evolve in ways neither of them had expected. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, though the road ahead was still uncertain. For Mark, it was no longer about just surviving or honoring a contract. It was about building something real, something he never thought he'd have. But just when things seemed to be heading in the right direction, a complication emerged that neither of them could have predicted. It started with a phone call. Mark had just finished a long day of meetings when his phone buzzed. It was a text from Eleanor. "We need to talk. Can you meet me at the office in 30 minutes? His stomach twisted at the tone of the message. He quickly grabbed his jacket and headed out the door, wondering what was going on. When he arrived at Eleanor's office, he found her standing by the window, her back to him. The atmosphere was tense, and Mark could tell something was weighing heavily on her. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Eleanor turned around slowly, her face unreadable. "I received some news today," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's about the company. There's been a major breach in one of our deals. We're at risk of losing everything we've worked for." Mark felt his heart skip a beat. "What kind of breach?" he asked, his mind racing. Eleanor took a deep breath, her eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and fear. "I can't go into details just yet, but it's serious. We could lose our investors, and the business could be in jeopardy." Mark stepped forward, his concern for her outweighing his own worries. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Eleanor hesitated, her gaze flickering away. "I don't know if there's much anyone can do right now, but I'm going to need you with me through this. It's going to be difficult, and I don't want to go through it alone." Mark nodded, his heart swelling with a mix of determination and love. "I'm here, Eleanor. We'll figure this out together." He reached out, taking her hand in his. It was the first time he had ever seen her this vulnerable, and it made him realize just how much he cared for her. For the next few days, Mark threw himself into helping Eleanor with the crisis. They worked long hours, poring over financial reports, making phone calls, and trying to find a solution to the mess that had been created. Mark could see the toll it was taking on her. The confident, unshakable Eleanor was starting to crack under the pressure, her usual composure slipping. But through it all, Mark remained by her side, offering her both support and comfort when needed. One evening, after another exhausting day, Mark found Eleanor sitting alone in the study, her head in her hands. He walked over and sat next to her, unsure of what to say. "Eleanor," he said gently, "you don't have to carry all of this by yourself. Let me help you." She looked up at him, her eyes tired but filled with gratitude. "I know," she whispered, "but I've spent my whole life handling everything on my own. It's hard to let go, even just a little." Mark took her hand and held it firmly in his. "You don't have to do it alone anymore. I'm here, and we'll face this together." Eleanor squeezed his hand, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I don't deserve this," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I don't deserve you." Mark lifted her chin gently, his voice steady. "You deserve everything, Eleanor. And I'm here because I want to be." In that moment, Eleanor allowed herself to lean into him, to let the walls she had built so carefully around herself begin to fall. It wasn't a fairy tale, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long while, both of them allowed themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything they had been through could lead to something lasting. End of part 7. In the weeks that followed, Mark and Eleanor continued to work tirelessly to save the company, and their connection grew stronger. The crisis was far from over, but something between them had shifted. The tension, the fear, the uncertainty, it had all brought them closer together. What had once been a partnership founded on necessity was now evolving into something that resembled love. Mark could see it in the way Eleanor looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention, in the way her hand instinctively reached for his when the weight of the world seemed too heavy to bear. They weren't just business partners anymore. They were becoming something more, something real. One evening, after another long day of meetings and phone calls, they found themselves alone again in the penthouse. The city lights outside were dim, the soft hum of the city creating a backdrop to their conversation. Eleanor was sitting on the couch, her posture still regal, but there was a softness to her now. Mark joined her, sitting beside her, his body just a few inches away from hers. He could feel the quiet chemistry between them, and it made his heart race. The walls they had both built around themselves were crumbling, little by little, and he knew there was no going back. We're getting closer, Eleanor said quietly, her eyes looking out at the city. But there's still so much to do. I can't afford to let my guard down. Mark reached out, gently touching her arm. Eleanor, you don't have to do this alone anymore, he said softly. I'm here. We're in this together. She turned to face him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for any hint of doubt. I know, she whispered. But sometimes, I wonder if I'm worthy of all this. Worthy of you. Worthy of everything we've built. Mark shook his head, his hand brushing her cheek gently. You are, he said firmly. You're worthy of everything and more. You've worked hard for everything you've built, and now, we're building it together. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes glistening with a mix of emotion. I've spent so much time building walls around myself, she said quietly. I didn't know how to let anyone in. But you've made me believe that it's okay to take that risk. Mark smiled softly, his heart swelling at her words. You don't have to be perfect, Eleanor, he said, his voice full of warmth. You just have to be you. And that's enough. There was a pause, a moment of quiet understanding between them. Mark could feel the weight of everything they had been through, but now, in this moment, it felt like it was all worth it. Slowly, tentatively, Eleanor leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Mark's heart skipped a beat as she placed a soft kiss on his lips. It was gentle, unhurried, but it carried a weight of meaning that neither of them had expected. For a moment, neither of them moved. It was as if the world had stopped, leaving just the two of them in the silence of their shared connection. When they finally pulled apart, Eleanor smiled softly, her eyes filled with warmth and vulnerability. Thank you, she said quietly, for being here, for not giving up on me. Mark smiled back, his heart full. I'm not going anywhere, Eleanor, he said gently. Not now, not ever. And for the first time, Eleanor believed him. End of part 8. As the days passed, the crisis that had once threatened to destroy everything slowly began to settle. With Mark's help, Eleanor managed to secure the company's future. The investors returned, the contracts were stabilized, and the business began to rebuild stronger than before. But what mattered most was not the victory itself. It was what the two of them had discovered along the way. Their partnership, once defined by a contract and a desperate need for stability, had transformed into something genuine. Something neither of them had expected. One crisp morning, Mark stood on the balcony of the penthouse, the sun rising over the city in shades of orange and gold. He took a deep breath, feeling lighter than he had in years. For the first time, he felt like he truly belonged in this life. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Eleanor walking toward him, her hair slightly tousled and her expression soft. You are up early, she said, a faint smile touching her lips. Mark shrugged. I could not sleep. I was thinking about everything that has happened. Eleanor joined him at the railing, her hand resting just an inch away from his. It has been a journey, hasn't it? She murmured. Mark nodded. Yeah, a complicated one, but I do not regret any of it. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with something warm and sincere. Neither do I, Mark. For a quiet moment, they simply stood there, watching the city wake up. Then Mark gently took her hand, intertwining their fingers. Eleanor, he said softly, I know how we started. And I know we said this would be temporary. Just a contract. Just business. But that is not what it feels like anymore. Not to me. Eleanor swallowed hard, her voice almost trembling. It is not just business to me either. Mark turned toward her fully, his heart pounding. Then let's make this real. Not because we need it. Not because of the company. But because we want it. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes glistening with emotion he had never seen so clearly before. Are you sure? She whispered. Mark smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. I have never been more sure of anything. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing as if she had been holding her breath for months. Then yes, she said softly. Let's make it real. Mark reached into his pocket, revealing a simple ring he had bought just days earlier. He had not planned the moment, but somehow, it was perfect. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as he sank to one knee, his voice steady and full of love. Eleanor Brooks, I do not want to be your contract husband anymore, he said gently. I want to be your real husband, your partner, your family. Will you marry me for real this time? Tears filled her eyes as she nodded, her voice breaking. Yes, Mark. Yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms. The city around them seemed to fade away as they held each other, two people who had started with a lie and found the most honest truth of their lives. Their kiss was soft but full of promise, sealing the new beginning they had chosen together. No contracts, no conditions, just love. And as the sun rose higher over the skyline, Mark and Eleanor stepped into their future, side by side, partners in every way that mattered.